The Sejjil-2 fired in combat today, for the first time. Iran's most feared ballistic missile, a solid-fuel, two-stage weapon designed specifically to defeat Western missile defense systems, entered this war on March 15, 2026. Wave 54, Operation True Promise. 4. And nothing in Israel's existing interceptor inventory was built to stop what it does at high altitude. This is not a tactical escalation. It is a threshold. When a weapon crosses from deterrent to deployed, the strategic calculation of every government watching this war changes in a single morning. One disclosure arrived 24 hours before that weapon flew. U.S. officials confirmed to Semaphore that Israel informed Washington it was running critically low on ballistic missile interceptors. The IDF denied it publicly the next day. One of those statements is structurally impossible. What happens in the next 72 hours will determine whether the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil still attempts to move, stays closed, and whether the energy costs already embedded in your daily life continue their climb. 5 specific questions are emerging from today's events. None of them have been answered in any broadcast coverage. The first, U.S. officials confirmed Israel's ballistic missile interceptor stockpile is critically depleted. Israel's government denied it publicly within hours. The financial data embedded in that contradiction, not the press statements, is what tells you which version is accurate. The second, IRGC Aerospace Force Commander Brigadier General Majid Musavi chose today, specifically day 16, to deploy the Sejjil-2 for the first time. This weapon was available from day 1. The question is why it was held in reserve for 15 days of active war, and what that timing tells us about Iran's assessment of the interceptor situation it was watching. The third, Ayatollah Khamenei was killed on February 28th. Iran has conducted 54 missile waves without a confirmed supreme leader. The Sejjil-2 was authorized by a command structure that no Western intelligence agency has fully mapped since that death. That gap is not symbolic. It is operationally significant. The fourth, RTX, manufacturer of the Patriot Interceptor, has seen its stock rise 110% since 2023. Iran burned through an estimated $2.4 billion worth of those interceptors in the first 5 days of this war alone. The financial architecture of who profits from a prolonged conflict is already visible in the market data. The fifth, Reuters reported on March 12th that Iran is nearing a deal to acquire 50 CM-302 supersonic anti-ship missiles from China. The USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford are currently operating within that weapon's engagement range. By the end of this video, you will understand the Sejjil-2's first deployment at a level that most analysts watching this conflict in real time have not yet reached. Stay with me, because the interceptor depletion that Washington privately confirmed, combined with a missile specifically engineered to exploit that depletion, is the most consequential financial and military signal this war has yet produced. And it is already moving energy prices, defense portfolios, and shipping lane calculations on every continent. If you want to understand what is developing before it becomes tomorrow's front page, this channel is where you need to be. Here is what actually led to this moment. On February 28, 2026, U.S. and Israeli forces launched a coordinated strike campaign targeting Iranian nuclear facilities and military infrastructure. Multiple confirmed reports, including Reuters and NDTV, indicate that the opening operation killed Iran's 86-year-old supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The war was still in its opening hours when the supreme command of the world's most missile-equipped non-nuclear state was eliminated. Iran's response was immediate and systematic. Wave 1 followed within hours. Liquid fuel ballistic missiles targeting Israeli cities and U.S. bases in the Gulf. By March 1st, 6 American service members were dead at a makeshift operations center in Kuwait. By March 7th, the Pentagon reported striking more than 15,000 targets inside Iran. A think tank, cited by Al Jazeera, estimated U.S. weapons expenditure at $3.7 billion in the first 100 hours alone. What followed across the next 15 days was a deliberate escalation of missile capability with each successive wave. Iran worked through its Ahmad, Qadr, Khorramshahr, and Khaybar-Shekhan systems, each more capable than the last. The pattern was not random. It was a sustained burn designed to drain interceptor stockpiles faster than they could be replenished. Today, with Wave 54, Iran introduced the Sejjil-2. The escalation ladder has reached its most capable rung. This strategic architecture has documented historical precedent. In October 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a coordinated military operation that triggered the Arab oil embargo, removing 5 million barrels daily from global markets. Oil quadrupled within months. Inflation accelerated across Western economies for 2 consecutive years. The financial mechanism was identical to today. Military escalation generates energy shock. Energy shock generates sustained inflation. Inflation generates political pressure on the intervening powers. The more immediate precedent is June 2025. In that 12-day conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, the Center for Strategic and International Studies confirmed the U.S. fired over 150 THAAD interceptors, roughly 25% of its entire inventory. The coalition won that engagement. But it entered this February 2026 war with a structurally depleted stockpile. THAAD interceptors require 18 to 24 months to manufacture. That production gap did not close between June 2025 and February 2026. The shortage that Semaphore confirmed on March 14th was not a surprise. It was a scheduled outcome. But the question nobody's asking yet is this. If the Sejjil-2 is specifically engineered to maneuver at high altitude to defeat the interceptors that are now confirmed depleted, what does that mean for the continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil still cannot pass? That historical parallel tells us only half of what is happening. The other half is financial, and it is the half the headlines are ignoring. IRGC Aerospace Force Commander Brigadier General Majid Musavi confirmed the Sejjil-2 launch on March 15th. According to data from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the missile is 18 meters long, weighs 23,600 kilograms, and carries a 700-kilogram warhead to a range of approximately 2,000 kilometers. That range covers every strategic target in Israel, every U.S. base in the Gulf, and reaches parts of southern Europe. The critical difference from Iran's previous 53 waves is the propulsion system. Liquid fuel missiles require hours of launch pad preparation, creating a surveillance window that pre-launch strike doctrine is designed to exploit. Solid fuel missiles require minutes. The Sejjil-2's preparation window is too short for current preemptive strike protocols to neutralize reliably. That is its primary tactical value. Wave 54 also included cluster munition warheads on additional missiles, a development confirmed by both CNN and Israeli newspaper Haaretz. A single cluster warhead splits mid-flight into dozens of independent submunitions. Each requires a separate intercept. One launch event multiplies into a distributed swarm. Against a depleted interceptor stockpile, the mathematics become rapidly unsustainable. Brent crude closed at approximately $103 per barrel on March 15th. In the opening days of this conflict, it surged above $120. The International Energy Agency, in its monthly report published March 12th, declared this the largest oil supply disruption in the history of the global market. 8 million barrels per day have been removed from supply. Flows through the Strait of Hormuz are down over 90%. The IEA's 32 member countries coordinated the release of 400 million barrels from emergency reserves, and oil is still above $100. Global consumption growth projections for 2026 have been revised down by 25%. Oil sustained above $100 for more than 30 consecutive days, which this conflict has now produced, adds an average of 2 percentage points to inflation across Western economies. That arithmetic reaches every petrol station, every food supply chain, every mortgage rate adjustment. Gold surged to an intraday high near $420 per ounce in the early days of this conflict, according to Disruption Banking's market desk. JP Morgan analysts established a long-term price target above $6,300, citing a 5 to 10% geopolitical risk premium. The S&P 500 fell over 1% in the opening week. Airlines dropped 5 to 6%. RTX, parent company of Raytheon, manufacturer of both the Patriot and THAAD systems, saw its stock rise 110% between March 2023 and today. Northrop Grumman rose 60% in the same period. At $10 million per THAAD interceptor, every Iranian missile wave is functionally a defense industry purchase order. Lockheed Martin expanded its THAAD production capacity in January 2026. The White House is now pressing all major defense contractors to accelerate output. On March 15th, Italian military officials confirmed that an Iranian drone struck the Ali al-Salem air base in Kuwait, destroying an Italian Army MQ-9 Reaper combat drone. NATO alliance members are now absorbing direct materiel losses. Canada faced parliamentary criticism this week after its government concealed a missile strike on Canadian forces in Kuwait, an attack only disclosed on March 12th. The Wall Street Journal confirmed in March that 3 U.S. F-15E fighters were destroyed in a friendly fire incident involving a Kuwaiti aircraft, a fact that has received almost no analytical attention. China issued a formal statement of grave concern at the UN Security Council. Russia's President Putin publicly denied providing intelligence to Iran, after 3 named U.S. officials told the Washington Post that Moscow had shared precise U.S. warship coordinates with Tehran. That denial changes nothing operationally. The drone that killed 6 American service members in Kuwait on March 1st struck a makeshift operations center whose coordinates appear on no public document. The consequences mapped across these 4 domains are only the observable surface. What the financial markets are quietly pricing in right now is a scenario that no official at any podium is willing to name publicly. The official American position delivered by White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt on March 14th is precise. Iranian drone attacks are down 95%, ballistic missile attacks are down 90%, and U.S. stockpiles are more than enough to achieve current objectives. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar publicly stated on March 15th that Israel is not running low on interceptors and is ready for any scenario. On the surface, the coalition appears to hold a decisive operational advantage over a degraded adversary. The energy futures market is not reading the same document. Brent crude remains above $100. The IEA has issued a formal declaration, not a projection, a declaration, of the single largest oil supply disruption in recorded market history. Emergency reserve releases of 400 million barrels have not reversed the price trend. That sustained gap between official optimism and market behavior carries a specific analytical signal. Institutional capital does not believe this resolves quickly. The interceptor arithmetic is more revealing. The U.S. spent an estimated $2.4 billion on Patriot interceptors in the first 5 days of this war. Each THAAD interceptor costs $10 million. Each Patriot costs $3 to $4 million. Lockheed Martin expanded its THAAD production capacity in January 2026, months before this war was publicly anticipated. That is a commercial production decision. Commercial production decisions of that scale do not precede conflicts that clients claim are not coming. The production expansion and the shortage confirmation are the same financial signal, separated by 6 weeks. Iran's cluster munition warheads, confirmed operational by CNN on March 12th, complete the economic picture. A cluster warhead forces multiple intercept expenditures against a single launch event. Iran spends tens of thousands of dollars per salvo. The US and Israel spend tens of millions per defense response. That exchange ratio is what sophisticated institutional investors are currently pricing into energy futures and defense sector positions, not victory, attrition. China's behavior in this conflict requires more careful reading than its statements suggest. Beijing used the word grave at the UN Security Council. It has not activated the CM-302 missile agreement with Iran yet. Reuters reported on March 12th that Iran is approaching finalization of a deal to acquire 50 CM-302 anti-ship missiles, a weapon that travels at Mach 3, skims at altitudes that compress a carrier's reaction window to seconds, and is classified by military analysts as a carrier killer. The USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford are currently operating within its engagement envelope. Beijing is not providing these weapons out of ideological solidarity. As Al Jazeera's analysis noted on March 12th, China is using this conflict as a live-fire laboratory, collecting data on how U.S. carrier strike groups respond to saturation speed threats. The scenario it is actually preparing for is not the Gulf. It is the Taiwan Strait. Russia's behavioral signal is less ambiguous. Putin denied sharing intelligence. 3 senior U.S. officials contradicted that denial directly to the Washington Post. Russia's Kayam satellite, the Canopus V system transferred to Iranian operational use, provides Tehran with continuous optical and radar coverage of U.S. naval positions. The drone that killed 6 Americans in Kuwait on March 1st hit coordinates that do not appear on any public map. Attribution is not confirmed, but the geometric question is simple. Who had that information? This answers the loop planted in Section 3. The Sejjil-2 was not held in reserve for psychological reasons. It was held in reserve because Iran was watching the interceptor numbers. It deployed the Sejjil-2 today because the stockpile it was designed to defeat has now been confirmed by U.S. officials to Semaphore on March 14th to be critically depleted. The weapon and the moment were matched by a calculation, not a calendar. Step back from the battlefield for a moment. The most consequential development in this conflict is not occurring in the air above Tel Aviv. It is occurring in energy futures contracts, THAAD production schedules, and a missile deal between Tehran and Beijing that has not yet been signed, but whose shadow is already visible in commodity prices and carrier group positioning. 3 specific conditions would need to converge simultaneously. Iran would need to accept verifiable nuclear constraints as a precondition for ceasefire. The Strait of Hormuz would need to begin reopening to commercial traffic, and Washington would need to accept terms that President Trump described on March 14th as currently not good enough. The financial pressure toward this outcome is measurable. Everyday oil sustains above $100 per barrel, costs the global economy billions in supply chain disruption. If U.S. domestic inflation exceeds 5% in the coming weeks, the political environment shifts. In a de-escalation scenario, energy analysts project Brent returning to the $75-$85 range within 60 days of Hormuz reopening. Defense sector stocks would face a sharp correction. Lockheed and RTX's current valuations assume a sustained conflict. The scenario most consistent with verified current positions is a prolonged exchange of 4 to 6 weeks, the White House's own internal assessment. Iran has demonstrated 54 waves of fire in 16 days. The IRGC retains additional missile variants not yet deployed. The U.S.-Israeli interceptor stockpile is under documented pressure with a production timeline that cannot close the gap. In this scenario, the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively sealed. Gulf producers sustain collective daily output cuts of approximately 10 million barrels. Oil holds between $100 and $115, an estimated 2 to 3 additional percentage points of inflation embedded into Western economies. Defense production contracts accelerate. RTX's THEAD production line operates at maximum throughput at $10 million per unit. One specific trigger exists that current modeling has not fully priced. If China finalizes the CM-302 transfer to Iran, and those weapons are deployed against the USS Abraham Lincoln or USS Gerald R. Ford, the U.S. faces a decision with no clean military precedent, a carrier-class engagement initiated with Chinese-manufactured weapons. Reuters confirmed on March 12th that the deal is approaching finalization. In that scenario, independent energy analysts project Brent crude above $150. The Strait closure would compound simultaneously. A carrier-class engagement in the Persian Gulf would trigger Article 5 consultations within NATO and emergency sessions at the UN Security Council, with China holding a veto. That is not a regional conflict. That is a restructuring of the entire global security architecture. Regardless of which path this conflict takes, one outcome is already irreversible. The IEA's declaration of the largest oil supply disruption in history, and the subsequent emergency release of 400 million barrels that failed to stop the price climb, has exposed a fundamental structural gap in the post-1973 buffer architecture. That gap will not close before the next crisis arrives. The market has already absorbed that fact. The question is whether the political class has. When we opened this video, we said the Sejjil-2 crossed from deterrent to deployed, and that the Iron Dome had no verified answer for it. What the evidence now shows is more specific. Iran did not introduce this weapon because it exhausted its other options. It introduced it because the interceptor stockpile it was engineered to defeat was confirmed critically depleted by U.S. officials on the record the day before the launch. The timing was not psychological. It was financial. Iran read a balance sheet, then it fired. 3 things to carry from this analysis. First, the IEA has confirmed the largest oil supply disruption in global market history. 8 million barrels per day, removed now for 16 consecutive days. That cost is already embedded in your fuel price, your food supply chain, and your central bank's next interest rate decision. Second, the interceptor economics of this conflict structurally favor the attacker. Iran spends tens of thousands per salvo. The US and Israel spend tens of millions per defense response. Lockheed and RTX already knew this in January, before the war started. Their production expansion decisions are the earliest confirmed financial intelligence signal this conflict generated. Third, China is not a spectator. Every CM-302 contract milestone, every Khayyam satellite pass, every Sejjil-2 that flies and is not intercepted is data collection for a different war, in a different theater, against a different target that has not yet been named. The signal that defines what comes next will not arrive in a press release. It will appear in the energy futures market the morning after the CM-302 deal is publicly confirmed or officially denied. When that number moves, we will be here to map its architecture before it becomes the version you read in the headlines. If what you understood in the last 15 minutes is not what you heard on the news last night, you already know why this channel exists. Share this with someone who is still reading only the surface.